Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Baldrige Foundation's Institute for Performance Excellence webinar, Designing and Implementing an Action-Oriented Customer Feedback System. As a reminder, due to the high number of participants today, everyone will be kept on mute during the presentation. If you have questions, please submit them to the moderator in the Q&A box located on your control screen. Presenters will answer questions during our Q&A panel discussion. Before we get started today, I want to take a moment and recognize members of the Mac Baldrige Society who serve as the trustees for the Foundation's Institute for Performance Excellence. It is their generous support that makes presentations like today's possible. And here's today's agenda. Our guest presenters are George Taylor, founder and chief client officer of Beyond Feedback, Deb Salazar, chief experience officer, Del Norte Credit Union, and Carrie Stacy, the Chief Performance Officer for Del Norte Credit Union. Following their presentation, we'll take questions from the audience, and I'll have a few closing remarks. So to get us started today, I'm going to turn it over to George.
Great. Thank you so much, Al, and good afternoon to everyone on here. It is always an honor to get an opportunity to present to this community. You always are thoughtful and love getting to share some insights with you, and just grateful to the Baldrige Foundation for putting this on today. Excited to talk to you about how do we design and implement an action-oriented customer feedback system. And we have some great partners of ours here with us today from Del Norte Credit Union. I'm going to talk about it at a sort of a conceptual level and how to design this. And then they're going to pick up from there and talk about how that actually applies and how they operationalize it inside of their business. For me, it all started I'm sorry, before I get into that, just real quickly, who is Beyond Feedback? Some of you may not be familiar with us. We are one of the leaders nationally here around workforce and customer insight services. We really think holistically about the employee experience from the entire life cycle, from onboarding that employee to engagement surveys to exit surveys and lots of tools in between. And likewise, we think about that on the customer side as well, which is what we'll focus on today. In terms of onboarding new customers, what should we be asking them? What is sort of a measure of customer experience? And then when we lose customers, or maybe we don't pick up business that we thought we should, what does that look like? Well, we were founded in 2011, based in Phoenix, Arizona, and yeah, it is sunny here, even in February. We're honored to partner with several National Quality Award recipients in the past, and have been partners with the Baldrige Foundation for a number of years now, and are honored by that as well. So for me, it all started with kind of a drawing on a cocktail napkin. About 20 years ago, I got exposed to a book by Fred Reichheld called The Loyalty Effect. And if you haven't had an opportunity to read that, I would highly recommend it. It's a great book. This little cocktail napkin drawing here is a little bit of an illustration of a visual that he has inside that book. And the visual really talks about how you create a virtuous relationship inside of your business by driving loyalty among your customers. And the star you see in the center is sort of how do we create superior value for our customers? And that superior value ultimately starts to drive customer loyalty. We have great customer loyalty. We bring in the right new employees. We attract people to that business that are excited to work there, and we have great customer relationships, so it's a great place to work, right? So that gives us all kinds of cost advantages in terms of lower retention of our employees, compensation advantages, other things that ultimately kick off sort of financial value to the company or to the shareholders that we can then reinvest back into creating more great customer experiences and more great employee experiences. And so this visual, for me, being a finance guy and a marketing guy, is sort of like the perfect visual to start to really think about how businesses and organizations could operate differently and really take a different approach to this, not be so focused on the financial outcome, but be more focused upstream on what we can do with the customer experience and the employee experience that will ultimately yield the outcomes that we want. And so that was sort of the genesis, really, 20 plus years ago of the firm, and how we got into this whole space of customer experience measurement and customer experience management. Because one of the things that you'll certainly recognize in this visual is if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this well, I have to have a deep understanding of my customer needs. I've got to collect customer feedback and use that and apply that in operational and strategic ways to really transform my business and transform those individual customer relationships that I have throughout the business. You know, I've already used a word that you know, we talk about loyalty. I mentioned the word loyalty, and sometimes we kind of mix that with satisfaction, and we think of customer satisfaction and customer engagement or customer loyalty. What's the difference, right? I think if you look at the Baldrige criteria, we talk a lot about customer engagement and what that looks like. So we talk about satisfaction. Satisfaction is kind of a positive attitude that I have towards a brand. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's, are you fulfilling my expectations? Are you filling my needs, my wants? Here's what we know, though, is that satisfied customers will leave, right? The satisfaction doesn't necessarily predict their behavior. It's good, but it's not sufficient. If I want to tie this and I really want to build my business or my organization, the results of the performance around this notion of building customer value, I have to think about this differently. And that's where I start to shift over and say, okay, I have to think about engagement or loyalty. And what does that mean? If you look at the Baldrige definition, we talk about emotional and intellectual commitment to the company, right? There's this sort of connection and commitment that we have. The definition, one of the definitions that we like a lot is it's a set of behaviors that customers consistently take despite situational obstacles, despite competitive options that positively impact the organization's financial results or business performance outcomes, right? It's kind of a big definition, but it's in essence kind of what we're trying to all make happen, whether those are patients or students or parents of students or whatever industry we're in. We want to think about what are the behaviors that are ultimately going to drive those outcomes. In working in this space and doing lots of research into the existing literature around all this, there's really 5 categories of behaviors that you find. The first is retention, right? Is the customer or the patient, are they going to stay with me? Are they going to avoid competitive offers that would maybe draw them away? Right. So this notion of retention. And so I can start to think about that set of behaviors of a customer. The second big set of behaviors is around repurchase. Are they going to buy again in the future? Are they going to continue to subscribe? Are they going to continue to visit my website? Those types of revisit, repurchase types of behaviors. Expansion. A customer or maybe a member of a credit union that's doing a certain service with us today, will they expand into other services? Will they buy other products? Will they kind of expand that relationship with us? That's a behavior that we can measure, right? Advocacy, this is a very popular one. We'll talk about this in a little bit of detail here as we go, but the notion of advocacy, will they advocate on behalf of my brand? This often looks like, would they recommend me to someone else? Very popular question there. Would they advocate for us? You know, do they talk about us at the high school basketball game when they're sitting around with their neighbors and friends? And the last one, compliance. And this is sort of an odd one, and it applies to some industries. You might think of compliance as, when I have this engagement from the customer, they'll comply with, or they'll do things that are beneficial to us as a business, or maybe even help us operate more efficiently. So in a banking environment, that might look like a primary banking relationship, right? They're going to comply with that and extend that primary banking relationship. In a utilities business, it might be about using the service in off-peak hours, right? So is that customer the behavior there about compliance? Will they kind of go along with things or programs that are ultimately beneficial to the way that we deliver service to the market? So those are different categories of behaviors, but let's put them into like a broader framework, if you will, right? And this framework is really built around the social science literature for about the last, 30 years now, going back into the 90s with Dr. Larry Crosby out of Arizona State University was a big influence on me and my thinking around all this. And it really starts on the left-hand side here with customer experiences, right? So you think about what customers see, hear, read, and experience about your organization or with your organization ultimately activates a set of rational and emotional motivators. And we're going to talk about all these in more detail here. Those motivators drive behavior, advocacy, retention, repurchase, expansion, compliance. Those behaviors ultimately yield the results that we're trying to drive as a business. And that might be financial results, that might be growth of the organization, it might be mission fulfillment if I'm in a ministry environment or a nonprofit of some sort. So, we're really kind of thinking about that high level structure of how these different things connect starts to get us to a place where we can start to think about, okay, what does this look like now as a feedback system, right? But before I go there, I want to dive a little bit deeper into that very first behavior there around advocacy, because this is a popular topic that gets popularized around something called the Net Promoter Score. And many of you may be familiar with the Net Promoter Score and you think it's a great tool. It is a great tool. It has many benefits to it. The Net Promoter Score is a very popular approach to measuring customer behavior. And for those of you that are maybe not familiar, it's based on a simple question. How likely would you be to recommend this organization to a friend or family member, or in the context of a business to business environment, maybe how likely would you be to recommend to a business colleague? That question gets asked on a 0 to 10 scale. 9s and 10s are what we call promoters. 7s and 8s are called passive. And those that score 0 to 6 are called detractors. And the concept of the Net Promoter Score, as many of you know, is we take the percent of promoters that responded, we subtract the percent of detractors, and we end up with a net promoter score, right? So do I have more promoters than detractors, or do I have more detractors than promoters, as a way to kind of gauge the advocacy element of those behaviors that we talked about. That score, as you can imagine, can go from a -100 if I have a really bad, I'm not creating virtuous cycles for our customers, meaning that everybody I talk to is a detractor. I don't want that scenario. None of us want that scenario. It could be a +100. That's extraordinarily rare, by the way. Typically in this scale, 70 and higher is considered world-class. You look at Ritz-Carlton, that has been involved in Baldrige in years past. They typically score up around a 75. USAA typically scores around a 76. So world-class levels really above 70 on a consistent basis. Now, Net Promoter Score, it's useful and it's simple, and it's really valuable if your business is driven solely by recommendations, right? If I drive my business forward solely on the basis of people recommending me to others, great, I would use this and probably only this. This is a great way to measure the customer experience and understand, are you creating value for customers or not? Most of our businesses or organizations are driven by more than just recommendations, right? As you saw on the previous page, they're driven by other behaviors as well: repurchase, expansion, renewals, all those types of things. So we want to make sure that when we think about our business, we're not getting too tied into just recommendations, because it's good, but it's one small set of behaviors in a big panoply of behaviors that we really want to measure, right? And one of the other factors related to this is that there have been a number of studies over the last several years, well, over the last couple decades, that really indicate that any multi-question or multi-item index will outperform any single question index, right? So how likely are you to recommend? That's a single question index. If I ask likely to recommend and likely to repurchase and likely to expand and likely to stay with me, that's a multi-question index. So any multi-question index is going to outperform the single question index on a couple dimensions. One, predictability. Predictive of customer behavior, it's going to be more predictive. It's going to be more stable. One of the drawbacks that organizations have found around Net Promoter Score oftentimes is it'll bounce up and down, and you don't really have a causality to why. And so you end up scratching your head going, well, it was a 60 and now it's a 32, and we don't really have a way to kind of connect those dots very well. The other thing is just kind of reliability of that metric as a good measure. So as you're thinking about how do I build this customer feedback system, what are the behaviors I want to measure, I would just encourage you, yes, there are some great approaches out there like Net Promoter Score, and there's nothing wrong with it. But think about augmenting that with other behaviors that you want to see your customers exhibit, because that's what's ultimately going to drive your business forward and make you successful. So let's talk about some of these behaviors and maybe apply them to some different industries, just to get your kind of thinking about what this might look like. So in the banking world, for example, we might have some performance outcomes around, hey, we want repeat usage or repeat visits. We want to understand the number of banking products that that particular member has. We want to understand assets that we have under management. Those are sort of the outcomes that we're ultimately trying to drive. So what are the behaviors that drive those, right? That's how you want to think about this. What are the performance outcomes we're trying to get to? What are the customer or member behaviors in the context of the credit union that we're ultimately are good sort of predictors of that or leading indicators of that? So for example, if I'm thinking about repeat usage and visits, I might say, hey, a primary banking relationship, how likely would you be to have a primary banking relationship with us is a pretty good indicator of that outcome, right? If we can move that primary banking relationship up, we're going to probably see that outcome move up in terms of repeat usage and visits. Um, uh, consider new product, how likely would you be to consider new products and services? It's a great indicator of number of banking products, right? So as you think about this for your business or your organization, think of those performance outcomes that you've been already mulling around as you think about the Baldrige criteria, and start to work backwards to what are the behaviors that I can measure in a survey, or the behavioral intent of the customer at least, that ultimately are going to drive those behaviors. In the healthcare realm, you see, patient satisfaction is sort of an outcome measure, right? Or reduced length of stay, or minimizing adverse readmittance, those types of things. So again, we want to think about the behaviors. How likely are you to revisit in the future? How likely are you to recommend to others? How likely are you to comply with discharge instructions? So we're starting to create a multi-question index of behaviors that are ultimately going to drive the kinds of outcomes that we want. We have a couple of other examples on here. I think the screen's cutting them off a little bit, and that's fine. But you can think about things like nonprofits and the value of our donor base, or the number of donors we have. What are the behaviors there? And then you can think even in like the education world, you might say, we're going to think of our customer as the student, and we're going to look at student success measures, right? So we're going to think about things like graduation rate. We're going to think about admit to job specialty or college as kind of their next step in their career. So then I want to work backwards and think about what are the things I can measure in a survey that are ultimately predictive of those kinds of outcomes. So for example, likelihood to comply with homework assignments, right? Likelihood to attend on a regular basis. Those are going to be good predictors of those kinds of outcomes. Now, when I talk about the education world, it brings up an interesting question, because I intentionally said, hey, let's imagine for a second that the student is our customer. Well, you might say, yeah, that's an interesting point. Is the student our customer, or is the parent our customer, or is some payment body that's paying the tuition our customer? Who's our customer, right? And so I think when you dive into this issue around, I want to create great customer feedback systems, one of the first things you're going to wrestle with is, who is my customer? And this is a great visual. This is going to require some pretty healthy debate inside your company to think through, how do we want to define who that customer is? Sounds like such a simple question, but I can tell you it's probably the most complex question of everything that we'll deal with here today. You can see on the visual on the right-hand side, there's 4 maybe different categories of customers, right? There's the user, the person that's actually using the product or service. There's the payer, the person that's paying financially for that product or service. There's the influencers on that purchase. And then there's the decision makers. And you have to figure out, what is the mix of customers that I want in this feedback system, so that I'm really getting a good representation of those different voices, because each of these have a different perspective on the product or service, right? The user has a very sort of useful approach to how they think about the product. The payer has a very different approach to how they think about the product. And you can see some examples here of how different individuals in these different roles might think about a product or service. And then you slice it one more way to say, there's also a dynamic of, is this a consumer relationship, or is this a business to business, or maybe business to government, or government agency kind of relationship? Those are very different in terms of how we would think about the user, the payer, the influencer, the decision maker. So key part of all of this is making sure that you really define these customer segments. It's a critical component of Section 3 of the criteria around listening, defining, and segmenting your current and potential customers. Definitely something you want to spend some time thinking through and really planning out and modeling out as you think about your customer feedback system. So let's jump back to our framework. We took a little bit of a sidetrack here, but I want to come back to this. Remember, we said customer experiences ultimately drive these motivators. These motivators drive our behaviors. These behaviors ultimately produce the results that we want in the organization. So we want to start to think about this as a framework for how we build and develop that survey out. If the survey is the tool that we're going to use, which what we're going to use today is sort of our customer feedback survey, right? So let's take this a step deeper and start to look at this in some more tangible terms. And I'm going to start on the far right-hand side. Let's start with the behaviors, right? The green boxes over there. So we might say something like, how likely would you be to recommend Del Norte Credit Union to a friend, family member, or colleague, right? It's a good measure of that advocacy behavior. How likely are you to maintain your current relationship with the credit union in the future? Another question, we can ask this on a 1 to 5 scale or 1 to 10 scale and get a score around that. How likely are you to consider other products and services that you don't currently use with the credit union? How likely are you to do all your banking activities with DNCU in the future? So you can see those different categories of behaviors that we're measuring there. Advocacy, repurchase, compliance, right? All those are sort of baked in there. And then we composite that together into a score that gives us a reliable, stable predictor of future business results. We're not just relying on a net promoter score. It's good, but it's probably not sufficient for most organizations. And so think a little more broadly about those other behaviors that you want to capture. Now, when we think about those behaviors, we said, okay, they're activated or they're driven by a set of rational and emotional motivators. So what do we mean by rational motivators? What do we mean by emotional motivators? It's like a rational motivator might be, hey, like that credit union's really differentiated from others, right? Or they really deliver value to me, or they're easy to do business with. They provide high quality service. These are sort of very rational sort of things that resonate in my mind. On the emotional side, I might say, I trust them. It's like a much deeper, like more emotional connection. Gosh, they just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, right? They're an ideal partner with me. They're committed to my community. Those kinds of emotional factors are the other component. And those of you that have done any study of this sort of rational and emotional motivators, what you'll know is whether we're talking business to consumer or business to business, a surprising percentage of the decision making is actually driven by emotional motivators, more so than rational, right? We think we're all rational. At the end of the day, we're a little more emotional in our decision making than we think. So we keep working backwards in the model then, and we say, okay, what are those member experiences? Well, there's a branch banking experience, and there's an online banking experience, and there's a contact center they may reach out. There's products and services they're interacting with. There's an onboarding process they're experiencing. And then we kind of explode each of those into individual attributes that we can actually measure now, right? So if we think about the branch banking experience, we'd say, well, am I getting prompt service? Is the rep personally engaging with me? Are they knowledgeable about the products and services? Are they knowledgeable about me as a member? Do they care about me? Are they offering solutions? Are they professional? Right? All these sort of individual attributes, we can start to really unpack what we mean when we talk about this branch banking experience. And what this ultimately allows us to do is to start connecting the dots between which of these items, let's just isolate the branch banking experience for a second. Which of these items that we've got listed, there's about 10 of them there, right? Which of those is most impactful in terms of driving these behaviors that I want, right? Because guess what? They're not all the same. We might score differently on different ones. Some of those are more impactful than others. And that's what we really want to understand, because when we're any organization that has limited ability to go do things, we can't go fix 10 things, right? But we can work on 1 or 2 things that we know are the most impactful things to focus on. And then if you expand this outside of just the branch banking experience, you say, okay, across all of our experiences, what's most important? Is it more important that they have an amazing, knowledgeable rep in the branch, or is it more important that it's really easy to open a new product? So we want to start thinking about this holistically then across all these experiences and say, which of these are driving those motivators that are driving those behaviors, right? And connect those dots backwards so we know where to make our investments in the experience that ultimately yield the outcomes that we want. Now, one other key piece of all of this that you see at the very bottom in some red text there is what we might call relational surveys versus transactional surveys. So, and let's just stay in our banking world for a minute, because it's a good example that we can all relate to. I have a transaction at the bank, right? I go make a deposit. That's an event, a transaction, right? And I can measure that transaction very discreetly. Was that particular rep at this transaction number on this day, were they knowledgeable? Were they friendly? Did they care about me, right? So I can get a picture of that specific event, and that's super useful, but it's still one specific event. So I also want to take a broader picture of the relationship overall and do that on maybe a quarterly basis, maybe every 6 months, at least once a year. Kind of what does the overall relationship look like with my entire customer base? And now I'm thinking about bigger, broader things, right? What do they like? What do these motivators look like? What do they think about overall about the branch banking experience, right? So there's kind of a way to sort of build this so that you get this relational feedback, maybe less frequently, but broader. And I get this transactional feedback that's much more real time, but a narrower focus, right, on a specific transaction. And by the way, while we're talking about those narrow focused transactions, it's a great opportunity for something that we call service win back, which is, hey, something went wrong. Guess what? In any organization, something's going to go wrong. Let's make sure that when we reach out to that member and we find out something went wrong, we loop back to them and close that loop with that specific member to make sure that everything is solid and we resolve whatever issue they had or problem they had, and help them through all of that. So this gives you a view of kind of what that model starts to look like as it all gets built out. What can we do with this then? Well, I think you can start to do some really powerful stuff. And this picture gives you a little bit of an idea of what some of that looks like. So the number one thing is the ability to start to connect that feedback to financial data, to operational data, and then to workforce data, right? And you can all see this model at the very top that you're probably quite familiar with about employee experiences driving employee engagement that ultimately drives operational excellence, that drives great customer experiences, that drives great customer engagement or behaviors that drive business results and outcomes. So what I want to do is thread that all the way back through my system so that I'm thinking about not just the results, but I'm thinking about how do I generate those results proactively, maybe as far back as the employee experience, right? And then as you do that, you can start to connect these dots and start to really get some meaningful insights out of it. So the chart on the left, as an example, is taking customer engagement data and employee engagement data. And this is a healthcare staff kind of example where we're looking at healthcare staff engagement on the y-axis, and then patient or customer engagement on the x-axis. And we can start to look at our different facilities. Let's say we're a system of hospitals, right? We can start to look at our different facilities and see, gosh, there is kind of a real relationship here between those facilities that our employees are more engaged at and the patient satisfaction or patient engagement scores that we're looking at, which helps us to start to identify not just those patterns, but what are the maybe strengths that are going on at a facility A or facility C that we could apply to facility K, right? And what do we need to do differently in those different places? Another example on the right-hand side of kind of connecting this to operational data. The first one was connecting customer feedback data to employee feedback data. Connecting customer feedback data to operational data. So looking at something like in a retail store environment, our staffing levels at stores linked to our customer engagement scores. So as an example here, we can look at our staffing level at the bottom on the x-axis there and say, okay, at 100%, we're a 68.7. At 95% staffing, we start to fall a little bit, but not too bad yet, right? At 90%, we're falling a little bit. It's not bad. Boy, once we get past like that 85% line, we start to see a big drop off. So we know from an operational perspective, strategically, we don't ever want our staffing level to fall below 85%. That's sort of our threshold where we're going to start to see a customer impact on that. So when these things are built right, you can really start to get a lot of insights, not just about what's going on with your customers, but how you connect that to other parts of your business and start to build this whole service profit chain together, where you can link that data in your business and really drive your organization forward. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to some partners of ours, a team that we're really grateful to work with. And they've got some great insights they're going to share with you about how they take these concepts and make them real inside of an organization. And to start, I'll turn it over to Carrie Stacy with Del Norte Credit Union.
Good morning or maybe afternoon, depending on where you're at. George, I don't have any napkins that I'm going to show today, but we do have a pretty good story to tell. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce Deb Salazar. She's our Chief Experience Officer. Deb is so instrumental in taking care of our employees that are taking care of our members. My role at the credit union is that I take care of those that are taking care of our members. So, we're all in sync. But I wanted to start off with kind of what can we expect from our part of the conversation today. And so we're going to get more into the designing the member experience. Deb is very instrumental in being able to take that experience and then to integrate the beyond feedback. And then, what's our process for converting it into action? And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the results that we've seen. So before we get too far, is Del Norte Credit Union, we got our roots back in 1954. There was 54 members and $1,100 in assets. And so the credit union, when it was formed, it was about people helping people, and so today that hasn't changed a lot for us as a credit union. We've grown a little bit, but we're not a bank. We're a credit union, but we think of ourselves more as a financial cooperative. We're an aggregation of all of our members, and our focus is really meeting our members' needs where they're at. And so when you mentioned the question around who's your customer, we serve New Mexicans. And I did that, I know there's more segmentation. It's more about how do we serve them? And Deb will talk about that in a moment. But like I said, today we're now at 1.3 billion in assets, 63,000 members to take care of. And when we start thinking about our mission of improving lives, we define that the survey process helps us define improving lives every time we're interacting with our members. And so as we go forward, we've got to be able to listen to our members well, but at the same time is to take our blinders off. Be careful what you ask for. We're getting it. And so I'd like to maybe jump over to Deb. So now that we're getting it, what are we doing with that? So let me go ahead and jump to the next screen here.
Thank you, Carrie. And it all starts with designing that experience for our members. What do our members expect from us? And it begins with our culture. And we have a value that we call our value here, and it's called Del Norteño Pride. And we don't define it. We try to be all inclusive. And if you ask people what it means to them, it means community, means family, it means serving people. And when I talk to our folks in our branches, improving lives could mean a smile, a sincere welcome and thank you at the end of the transaction, the interaction. We call them interactions. It could be saving them a lot of money when consolidating, debt. We don't define that. We don't know what happens and goes on in people's lives, so we just give our hearts to everyone that walks in the door. So we really work hard to create that wow experience. And we do it with our service standards. And Del Norteño Pride is who we are as people that care about people and want to help people truly from the heart. So, we build that through our mission of improving lives and being that ideal partner for a better future. And building relationships, doing the right thing, and being incredible. And we empower people to do these things. This is who we are as an organization. And this is where, for me, in my world, the rubber meets the road in operationalizing beyond feedback and the data that we get from our members, right? We obviously filter the data. We get alerts when we get detractors. Anything below a 9, I believe, we start getting alerts, and they go direct. We've mapped the system to they go directly to the corresponding manager at whatever branch that is, and then they're regional. And we set standards behind the first contact with that member. We contact that member within 24 hours to let them know that we've gotten their feedback and we're going to do a little research, or we can do a resolution right then and there. But we kind of take the time to also take that feedback, that survey, and get with the consultant or the teller specialist that may have had that interaction, depending on what it is, and kind of walk through that. Use that as a coaching tool. What happened? How can we make this better? What could we have done differently? And then we contact the member and we resolve that, whatever that issue was, resolve that within 48 hours. So we contact the member within 24, we resolve the issue within 48. And sometimes, it's not a service. It may be about a product or a policy or a procedure that's a roadblock for us. So we might have to do a little bit more research and get more people involved. But this is how we use the data. It's all encompassing. We have a systematic way of continuous improvement. And so the voice of the member is what we call it. It lives in our service quality area, which learning and development lives there as well, and our knowledge management. So it filters. So we have a team that kind of dissects and pushes information out. How can we improve? Not just in member experience, not just on the front line, but throughout the whole organization. Because we have people supporting us, and if they can't support us to support the member, it's really tough out there. So it's a really good, cohesive, collaborative team that does this. What else, Carrie?
Deb, you mentioned your recent experiences of taking that feedback and working with the managers and saying, how was this experience? And then how do we convert it over into something that's a more memorable experience?
It's so cool because I just had a meeting yesterday with all of our member experience managers, and we gamified it. We did what we call AHA slides, and we put up one of the comments or the surveys was about a member that rated us a 0 because they did not feel valued, which is one of the key drivers. And we really hone in on those key drivers. We talk about them. If they're low, we need to work on this piece. What can we do to make that member feel valued? So we just asked the question, how can we improve member engagement to make members feel valued? And everybody gets on the QR code with their phone, and they start telling us exactly what they would do, right? So we have all these things, and we did probably 6 slides of different scenarios. Another one was the member, which is kind of crazy, right? The member said the experience was perfect. They opened a new account. The whole experience was perfect, but rated us a 6. And we're like, okay. So I said, okay, let's go back. Tell us what we could have done better. I mean, they don't know what they don't know. They're a brand new member, right? So they don't, but it was a perfect experience, but maybe it wasn't that wow experience. We could have gone the extra mile. So it's clear that our managers understand that, right? And I said, okay, you guys get it. You know how to create that wow experience for all of our members. Do your folks know that? So this is where you come in to coach, use the surveys, coach your folks up, get them involved. What could we have done differently? What could you have done differently? And set those expectations, set those standards. And that's how we live, right? We train to it, we reinforce it, and we hold people accountable to it. It's kind of how we do.
So Deb, then what's the process that we use to actually to work? We're working with Beyond Feedback for the surveys for our employees and our members.
Right.
What are your thoughts as far as the evolution with that relationship?
Well, what the cool thing is, and that George showed us a little bit in the very last slide, I believe, was that there is a direct correlation between member engagement and employee engagement. And so we're really looking forward to now, we've been on the system since October. So we're really looking forward to seeing that data in our next employee engagement survey, and to be able to correlate that to continue to get better, to continue to improve in all areas. We don't just look for service and creating that experience. Of course, it's always fundamental, but we look at, what can we do better to provide better products and services for our members? Are there processes or procedures that are getting in the way of serving those members? So we look at all different aspects of the business to improve
Good,
that
thank you.
experience for our members.
So I get the geeky part. So George, stop smiling at me. This is the geeky part. But here at the credit union, we do think in ideals. And so if we were thinking in ideals, is what is the experiences that we're looking to drive? And then, if we're thinking about those experiences, what are those results? And then kind of backing into the house. Thinking in ideals, we definitely go through and identify our members' key requirements. I think you were kind the way you were describing it, but there's certain ones that we hone in on, and then how it starts to affect our training, how it starts to affect the development of new products and services. I want to give kudos out to our Chief Growth Officer is that he was able to create this product based on member needs where it was an adjustable product, but they made it very easy for them to switch it to a 30-year product and really control pricing for them. And that was in the members' best interest. Our CEO has been working on pricing and giving back to our members. So when we start to understand their needs and understand that we're a financial cooperative, how are we giving back? So there is a process that we think through ideals as we go forward. But on the right hand of the screen is that we spend a lot of time internally talking about and developing personal efficacy. And you're like, well, what does that mean? It's kind of the growth mindset for our employees. But as we're doing that, we're helping them to be able to release and better serve our members through the people side of the business. But when we start thinking about the me, we, and us, so better me's start to create better us's. And so things that we do, it is definitely systematic. We listen to the member feedback, the employee feedback. We start to say is what goals are we after? And then kind of starting to back into what is it that we need to do to get there. So definitely a structured way of doing it. And Deb's like systematic. But the answer is yes, it is systematic, it's regular, and it's ongoing. But as we go forward, Deb, if results matter, kind of what's going on for us today?
Well, they do matter. And what we found out throughout all of our different channels, social media and all of that, our members tell us that the work that we do the work that we do in the communities to serve our communities and to support our communities is really important to them, especially in our region in New Mexico. And we hear this so many times. The reason they came to Del Norte was because we do so much out in the community. So that's super, super important to us. And obviously the beyond feedback and that member feedback is super important. Advocacy, that building those relationships and all of that is important, but really what we do in the community is most important. And I'm just gonna say this: we started the year of 2024 as the 9th largest credit union in the state of New Mexico. We finished the 3rd quarter at the end of September, right, as the 4th largest credit union in the state of New Mexico. It's amazing. And if you know the demographic of New Mexico, except for Rio Rancho happens to be the largest growing city in the United States. But where we started up in northern New Mexico, those little communities aren't really growing. So it's been organic growth. We haven't merged. We haven't acquired any credit unions or other financial institutions. That's been organic growth. I think that is loyalty. Though our communities are loyal to Del Norte Credit Union. We had some great accolades. I think one of the other proudest ones is the New Mexico family-friendly business. I think that's so important to Del Norteño pride and improving lives. That's part of our culture. It's who we are as people. Best of Santa Fe, I don't know. We've gotten Best of Santa Fe in 1 or 2 categories every year for the 12 years I've been here. So 5-star rating from Bauer Financial, 83 consecutive quarters. A new one that came to us last year, right? Or this year, Newsweek America, one of America's best regional banks or credit unions in 2025. So lots of accolades. But I think the best thing for me and us is that our members really appreciate what we do for them and the communities that we serve.
So Deb, thank you. Just recapping kind of from our perspective is being very intentional with the member experience. It's a strategic focus for us, but we also have a focus on designing the employee experience. So, we're working with those hand in hand, and we're really locked into transforming feedback into results. Things that we've learned on the journey is it's not a sprint, and we're a work in progress. George, I think we talked earlier, we're kind of continuing to start our journey, to continue the journey, and we're not going to stop. But what we've seen is that needing leadership commitment to designing and take care of our members and our employees is so vital. Deb, one thing that we've worked internally is that with leadership commitment is that we're really focusing on an organization that's collaborating, continuous learning, and people focused. And then finally, and then I'll turn it back over to you, George, is the honest assessment of everything the organization does, which ties into the Baldrige journey and the voice of the member and the voice of the employees. So that's our story. And we're just kind of a work in progress, but there's more to come.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that outstanding presentation. And we do have a number of questions, so I'm just going to jump right in here. George, I think the first one's for you. You shared a great framework for a sophisticated approach to customer feedback management. We're just getting started, so where should we start?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it looks like really sophisticated and lots of components to it. I would say start where you are today. You can grow your way to the more sophisticated approach, but certainly just there are lots of mechanisms whether you just start with, hey, we're just going to pull together some focus groups of customers and meet with them regularly and talk about how do we get better. You don't have to get all the way to a survey yet. When you start getting to a survey, start with those behaviors. Start there and think about those behaviors that you ultimately want to drive in your business and start measuring those and getting a baseline established. It's a good way to start getting a sense for all that. And then start working backwards, right? And sometimes those rational and emotional motivators are kind of the harder part to figure out. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to say, you know what, I can really quickly define the call center experience and what I want that to be and how I want to measure that. Let's start there and just start measuring that call center experience on a regular basis. Build that into the cadence of metrics and review cycles that you're doing internally. And then connecting all that to the business results is probably the most important part. So you can link all this to other things like financials and operational and employees. So yeah, I would say, dig in where you're at. You don't have to invest, sometimes people think, oh, this looks, really complicated. I'm going to invest hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in this feedback system. No. I'll tell you, none of our clients are doing that. Figure out what you can do to get started with something. Get that feedback from customers coming in. Get that feedback from people that are not your customers coming in. Those are base elements of Section 3 of the Baldrige criteria and will really help to advance your organization's thinking about who is our customer, how do we serve them, how do we do it with excellence.
Okay. The next one here is for the credit union team, and it is, can you talk a little bit more about following up with members that share in the survey they had a negative experience? I'm curious to understand how those issues are routed to the right person internally to follow up with that individual member.
You bet. So when we extract our data, the transactional data, that information contains the branch that transaction or interaction was conducted at. So George and his team take that information, and so when the feedback comes back, the survey comes back, it'll display you had a transaction on this date. This is the type of transaction at this branch with. And I think sometimes it even, I think most times it does give the individual that conducted the transaction. So that's how we know. So we give them that data so that we can parse it out to that specific branch, and then it'll go to those specific managers to call back. to make that call. Does that answer your question? I hope so.
I think it did answer it. Okay, great. George, next one's back to you. Integrating this kind of data together is really powerful. Can you talk more about how to integrate insights from different survey programs together?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of the next level of all this, right? Is thinking about how we start to connect those dots. I think one of the simpler approaches that you might start thinking about is asking a common question across different survey tools that you have. So, for example, again, I don't think the likely to recommend question is a bad question, but it's a good one to ask, across different types of surveys. So I can ask my customers, how likely would you be to recommend us as a brand? I can ask my employees, how likely would you be to recommend us as a place to work, right? And I can start to construct some data that is consistent across these different tools that I can now start to connect the dots on. So I think starting, if we think about kind of crawl, walk, run, right? We might think about, I want to start with just some simple correlations. Is my customer net promoter score and my employee net promoter score connected? And then I can start to get a little more sophisticated and say, okay, they're connected, but what's the lag between that connection, right? I might say, does it work this way, where when I see my employee score go up, 6 months later, I see my customer score go up, right? So now you want to get a kind of the next level of thinking about what's the lag between those two metrics and start to really isolate those things. And I think as you start to dig into just a few simple things like that, correlating some data, just real simple things, I think your mind is probably gonna explode into, oh my goodness, I could start connecting this data to this. I could start connecting that data to that. So I think again, I'm a big fan of like, gosh, you don't have to shoot for the moon immediately. Take a couple steps in the right direction and you're going to find a lot of progress, and you're going to expose a lot of other tools and techniques that you can start to get into. Certainly, getting a good partner can help you with facilitating some of that, but it's not absolutely necessary. You can do some of this stuff today yourself.
Okay, fantastic. We've got time for one more question, and this one is for the credit union team again, Deb and Carrie. Can you share more about how to use this member feedback data to shape internal training programs for your tellers and your branch staff?
This is perfect. We purposely took the voice of the member and put it under service quality, where L&D, our learning and development program, lives, and our knowledge management program lives. Because so much of what we teach in the classroom is it's about service. What do we do when a member walks in? You acknowledge eye contact. During the transaction, you use their name 3 times. I mean, it's serving members 101, right? Sincere thank you, small conversation, make them feel like you really care about them. But when these things aren't happening, or when there are processes or procedures that need to change, it all has to go back through, we may make that change here, but we need to let L&D know, our learning and development team and our knowledge management team know what changes have been made. How do we serve members so they can adjust their training curriculums? And when they're teaching service, how do we treat members? How do we acknowledge members? What does that look like? So it just fits right through there. So we've got a systematic way, we've got a map, and we've got, when things change, it goes through here, through here, through here, through here, and it all comes back down. So it's kind of a cool thing, because we have to teach, and we have our learning and development team facilitators that also go down into the branch. They kind of integrate into the branch to make sure that what they're teaching is exactly what's going on downstairs or in the branches. So all of that's integrated. And then we adjust
Fantastic.
curriculums, we adjust job aids, or whatever knowledge that needs to happen.
Okay. Carrie, do you have anything to add with that?
We're on our quality journey, and so we're just pleased to be able to spend time with the community here today. And thank you
Yeah.
for allowing us to share our story.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was great stuff. So, Deb, George, Carrie, thank you so much for your presentation and taking time to answer all those great questions. We didn't get to all of them, but for those that we did not get to, we will give them to the moderators, the correct one, and they will get back to you via email to answer your question. Um, if you go to the next slide, please. The Foundations Institute for Performance Excellence has more than 400 training and professional development certification opportunities offered online and at your own pace. This month, we're showcasing four that apply to today's presentation: project management, our yellow belt and green belt courses, and our data analytics courses. You can visit the Institute website at baldrigeinstitute.org/education to learn more and to register. As a reminder, the recorded version of today's presentation and slides will be available on the Foundation's website early next week. And once again, thanks to all of our great sponsors and donors. We hope to see you all again next month's webinar on March 20th. Please watch your inbox for details on the presentations. Thanks again for attending, everyone, and have a great day.